Yep.
Can keep an eye on it. All right, we ready?
I think so. It's all on. We're good to go.
All right, hey everyone, welcome back to Quality Matters. I'm your hostess, Darcy Chambers.
I'm Kyle Chambers.
And we have another special guest here from the Doug Mid-Continent Conference. We stopped and talked to Katie Salee with AIRIS Wellsite Services.
Yes.
Okay, so this was fun.
In today's global economy, quality matters. Benjamin Franklin once quipped, "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." Quality Matters is here to talk about all things quality. So whether you're looking to improve your business, getting ready for an audit, or dealing with failed inspections, tune in, check us out, then get back to doing work that matters.
Stopped by and she was talking to Kyle. Kyle totally understood what she was saying, and she handed him a little sample, which he's going to include pictures of in the show notes. And I had no idea what they were talking about. So I said, explain this to me. So explain it to us.
Sure. So thanks for having me. So what AIRIS Wellsite does is silica dust control on hydraulic fracturing sites. Mm-hmm. I always like to say we save lives, which makes our job really fun. But safety matters. And ultimately, silica is a human carcinogen, and it's on every frac site that uses some kind of sand proppant. So as the sand moves from the trucks upon delivery, through the different mechanisms to get it down hole, that sand can become airborne. That airborne sand is inhaled into our lungs. I think it's somewhere around 3 microns. Well, at 2.5 microns, things can move in and out of your bloodstream freely.
Oh, really?
So what happens is it gets into the deepest, darkest, smallest parts of your lungs.
So this isn't just sand that you can cough up?
No.
Okay.
No. It's invisible. You cannot see it. Gets into your lungs, creates scar tissue. That scar tissue can create a whole host of problems. Silicosis, cancer, kidney problems. It's really nasty stuff.
Yeah. So when she was showing the samples, I said, I don't know what I'm looking at. It looked like a empty little vial. It was maybe 2 inches tall.
99.999% empty.
It was clear and empty. I said, I don't know what I'm looking at. She says, because there's hardly anything in there. And so to help me understand, that was OSHA's limit for 8 hours. What the guys could inhale as they were moving
the PEL.
through. So, the PEL.
Permissible exposure limit.
That's right.
Okay. And so, this is more for the guys working, or the girls working with the sand. Me as a person just walking through town, it's not going to be that big of a deal.
Right. Now, there are all sorts of controversy in the world that if you're living close to a frac site or if you live close to a sand mine, that over time that it can become airborne and reach you. But what we're really worried about and what AIRIS is focused about today is the workers that are on the hydraulic fracturing sites day in and day out exposed to this stuff. There's a portion of that sand and dust that you can cough out, right? Because it's bigger. Right. But it's the invisible, tiny stuff that breaks.
And see, that was my initial thought when I looked at this. I'm like, that is not much sand. I plucked more sand than that out of my eye.
Right.
Well, I mean, this isn't much.
That's right. It's really, really small. And so OSHA implemented the stricter standard in 2016. But for our industry, for hydraulic fracturing, it has a phased-in approach. And so every June has become a more stringent target that it's getting harder and harder. So what's coming up in June of 2020, just almost, 7 months away,
right?
Is that the medical surveillance. So OSHA recognizes that you need to be medically surveilled if you're exposed to more than 50 right now, 50 micrograms per day. And you do that with industrial hygiene testing to establish a baseline. In June of 2020, they say at 25, so it's the action level. So it cuts it in half. You need to be medically surveilled.
Now, a lot of folks listening probably have to and half don't understand the difference in, the PEL and the action limit. Can you give a little bit of explanation on that for us?
Sure. So the permissible exposure level, PEL, is established by OSHA of the allowable limit of a exposure factor, whether it be chemical or anything.
And there are PELs for all sorts of things, from noise levels
That's right.
to lead, like you name it.
Asbestos, any kind of chemical hazard.
Anything dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they have established 50. Now, before June 2016, it was 100.
Okay.
So they cut it in half, but then they also established an action level, which comes from It's NCC IH. It's from the CDC.
Okay.
They say the action level or the recommended level really is that 25.
Gotcha. And the action level is where they have to start doing the medical testing.
Right, as
they
of
have
June
to
2020.
put prevention plans in place.
That's right.
Like they have to do something to help the folks.
That's right. You have to have an exposure plan. How are you going to handle the hazard?
So does that, so now our companies that have these employees, are they going to have to keep the records on how all their employees were?
So so OSHA says you have to keep it for the employee's tenure. So however long they work, plus an additional 30 years.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Because this is a long latency period. Exposure equals disease, but it's going to take some time.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're
And
really
so
serious about
what
it.
kind of medical testing do they have to satisfy OSHA?
So they have to have the chest x-ray that is by a NIOSH B reader, which is a very tough certification to get, as I understand, by a radiologist. And there's not very many of them in the United States. And so the medical surveillance
So kids, if you're listening, this is a career to go into.
Yes,
This is the way to go.
so it's a difficult, sometimes job to find the certified B readers.
Yeah.
You also have to have lung function tests, respirator fit tests, all sorts of different.
So this is
health
going to be a big
physicals.
cost
Yes.
for the oil industry. then.
Yes, and especially as you consider
Fracking.
turnover in our industry, which is usually
It
pretty
happens.
high. So every person that you have to hire, you bring in, you're going to have a baseline and then a repeat in every so many
And
years.
file storage for
Files,
all those
right.
people.
Yeah.
It's not like you got the same 20 employees working for you for 20 or 30
That's
years.
right.
They're turning over pretty quick.
That's right.
No, that's
Wow.
fascinating. That's fascinating.
And so then you were talking about the respirators that they have to wear, and how all the guys like to have a beard, like Kyle,
couldn't
and
do
that
it.
causes a problem with the seal.
Right.
Okay, so I can't even remember. Explain to me what you're, even in the perfect ideal environment with a good
Right.
seal, no beard, everything's happening the right way. What were you telling me?
So, and a half-face respirator has a what's called a protection factor of 10. So these respirators are guaranteed to work up to 500 micrograms per day of exposure. Now, that's assuming you're changing your filters as you should, and you have a perfect seal. So our company has done thousands of IH samples on frac sites where we have seen, without some sort of engineering control like we offer, that you can exceed that protection factor of those respirators in less than an hour. And so you might have a perfect seal, you might have clean filters, you're wearing it appropriately, you've got it,
But there's
got
just
it good and
more
tight.
than it can protect
There's just
against.
more than it can protect. And so you could go to a full face respirator or a
Ugh.
supplied air respirator,
Ugh.
but working in Texas,
done
those
those.
are
They're
so
not fun.
hot and so cumbersome.
They're not fun.
Midland, Odessa, that's exactly what they want.
Right.
Oh.
I mean,
in the
it was
summer.
so difficult to convince anybody. I mean, then you're worried about heat stress too, right?
Yeah.
So you just have to be
Yeah.
really careful. So
Okay,
an
so you
engineering
mentioned IH several times. What is that?
So it's industrial hygiene. It is
Okay.
the science of establishing how much exposure risk the people have.
That makes sense.
So,
that.
I got a question here before we go on too further. So, what you're talking about here that is especially dangerous is a very different type sand than necessarily even what goes down hole or than what you'd find at the beach. Like, this is an incredibly fine dust.
Right.
Is this something that they separate out before they put it down hole, or what do you know about that?
So if you think about, I think we all have heard maybe mesh sizes, right? So 40, 70, but we've moved into these
As of
micro-
yesterday, I've
Okay,
heard
well,
of
good,
these.
good. Yeah, so you're an expert. And so the industry has trended to using a whole lot more sand than we used to, in the early 2000s, to using a lot smaller sand. So
Okay.
the sand is like 100 mesh, 200 mesh. I mean, I've heard of 400 mesh jobs, which is smaller and smaller and smaller. So when you start small and you make it move from different points, it's going to break incrementally smaller because, right, it's the sharp edges that are breaking off as it tumbles down a conveyor belt.
Okay,
So compare that to like sand on the beach. What?
So sand on the beach is visible. You can see the individual grains, right? What I'm talking about is invisible.
Right.
And then you don't have the pneumatic, you don't have the artificial movement of that sand, right?
Okay.
So it's not being forced by air or
it's
gravity
not
to
airborne.
move.
Right.
And that's what's causing the problem.
Okay.
and the
but it's
training
also
you get
so
on the
small.
sand on the beach would take an enormous amount of time compared to
Right.
going in and out.
And not to mention,
things.
The sand on the beach has been wet recently.
Right.
Maybe it's the
So it's
tide,
not
maybe
gonna
it's the
float.
rain.
So
and the sand on the frac
sand.
side has been dried and condensed and then moved.
That makes sense.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of difference because when I first looked at it, that was my response. Like, well, this is upsetting that it's this tiny amount. I mean, my
Kyle,
gosh.
I thought we were going to have like a
Yeah,
cage fight.
but
over here
I
on the
wasn't
podcast.
thinking about the. Well, you mentioned about the microns on it.
It's really, really small stuff.
That makes an incredible difference because that's where you get into the silicosis and all of these problems that we used to have in a lot of American manufacturing that we got rid of 50 years ago.
Right.
And so it's a great opportunity for these terrible things to come back again.
Unfortunately.
Well, and to give our listeners an idea, you had mentioned that these grains of sand, like if I took a strand of hair out, that we could put 15 grains wide
on
not
one width of hair.
length, on the width.
Right.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's invisible.
That's what we're talking about.
Not
Yeah.
visible to the naked eye.
Yeah.
And our industry has a tendency occasionally of like, it's not dusty, it looks good to me, but you can't see it. So
Well,
you know it's
Gotcha.
happening.
And
but
I
you
can't even
see it.
remember who we spoke to yesterday on one of our
That's a good point.
podcasts, talked about, sand and litigation involving the sand, and they mentioned the beach. And so I think education is important so that people understand what's going on. So explain what your company does, AIRIS Wellsite Services. I want to make sure I say it right. And so you guys are working to help with this situation.
That's right. So we have a proprietary technology, but effectively, if I kind of dumb it down, it's a giant semi-trailer size HEPA vacuum. And so we hook it up in a certain way to protect. So every time that sand moves, we're able to capture that sand before it's released in the general atmosphere and consequently your lungs. It also helps with the capital equipment that's on site, because if you can imagine having all of that sand and dust go into the engines, it has the wear parts of the engines and affects the capital lives as well.
Well, and y'all would capture all the light stuff and leave the heavier particles in the air.
So
I like
y'all
it.
keep it enclosed.
We do.
Until it needs to be used.
Until it goes downhole.
Yeah.
Yes.
So even
Fascinating.
as it's going down, like it never becomes airborne, or is there a point at which it exits?
If it becomes airborne, it's going into our vacuum, not into the general environment.
Okay, so
Fascinating.
it's totally enclosed.
Yeah, so and nothing that you would be vacuuming out would be useful for any other operation at all.
That's right. Yeah, it's softer and smaller than talcum powder. The consistency of what we get. So we're not wasting any kind of sand that should go downhole.
No.
This is just the small, what they call fines, the breakage.
I think this is huge. Here's why I think this is huge. Because I've heard a lot of terrible talk and clearly been guilty of the same thinking. We get another little ding-dong bell. I'll cut this out in a minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. The conference will resume in a few minutes.
Because I hear these stories, I'm sure lots of other people listening hear these stories about the horrible requirements that are being put on these truckers going out there, and that it's just, these environmentalists or the OSHA trying to run down the industry. Which, if you assume sand like you get on the beach, and the kind of dust that I would get if my kids are playing in the sandbox and throw sand in the air, completely merited. But what you're talking about here is that literally it is completely invisible, truly invisible.
It is.
The human eye cannot see things that small.
Right.
Which then makes it easier to get into your bloodstream.
Yes, and then it gets, so this is an unseen hazard, truly unseen hazard that can cause problems for the rest of your life, if not kill you quickly.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is we get a lot of pushback occasionally from people who've been in the industry for 20, 30 years, and they're like, well, I'm not sick yet. What are you talking about? It's not, this is you're fear-mongering, right?
But from what you mentioned here and what I've heard other folks talking about in this conference is they're using more and more fine sand, and they're doing it a lot more. Fracking used to be just a fraction of the process.
That's right.
It's the key process in Texas.
You got it. You're preaching to the choir.
No, but this all makes sense. I think this is important information for folks to have.
I think it's important that we share it because our listeners know that we're not these kind of fear-mongering people.
No.
And we kind of dig deep and look into the facts. And even, like Kyle mentioned, even when we first started talking to you, y'all were kind of having a little bit of an argument. I said, no, save it for the podcast because he was mad that OSHA had such a low tolerance. And she was like, no, but it has to be. And now the understanding.
It makes sense. It makes complete sense. Because there's probably more particles in that tiny vial, which I'm going to have posted, than could be in a sandbox the size of this table.
100%.
You probably need to take a picture, a little video of the talcum powder vial that she has to show
or collected dust.
Yeah, it shows how fine it is.
Okay, we'll get that here in a little bit. We'll do that. That'll be fun. No, this is fascinating. I love having my opinion changed on things. I do. This is fascinating. I'm very, very glad we got the chance to sit down and do this. So other than the vacuum service, what else do y'all offer? How do you help folks out?
We also have an IH consultancy.
Okay.
And so really our goal there is to help companies navigate the new ruling and compliance. So how do you be in compliance? How do you establish that awesome safety culture where people really are passionate about saving lives and improving the well site working conditions?
And how far outside of what well site issues y'all go with that IH consultancy? Is y'all stick strictly to the well site, or do you branch out into more broad industrial safety?
I mean, we can. Our focus really is the frac site. That's our workspace. That's our home, and that's where we're passionate about really kind of changing people's minds, like we did yours.
It didn't take much.
And so you said y'all are out of Tulsa, but you work.
Yes, we have offices and yards in all the major basins across the United States.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Good. Cool. No, I think that's it. I'm good. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Darcy and Kyle.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Tell him to film you, not me.
Huh?
Tell him to film you, not me.
I don't think we have a choice. We're all in.
What up?
She said don't film her. Just to make sure she's out of the shot. Yeah.
Right. Knock it gently.
He's going to set a little timer.